We're all familiar with the Exodus, but what is it really? And what do Moses, Jesus, and the law all have in common? Well, let's jump in. Hey everybody, Jason Ian with Americans in Action, americansinaction.info, and our new website, spiritawarenessfoundation.com. So what is the Exodus? Well, as we know, the Exodus was, as the story goes, the enslavement of the Hebrews, not the Jews, but the Hebrews under the Egyptian Pharaoh. And it was an involuntary servitude. That's very important. An involuntary servitude. In other words, they were slaves against their own will. Then along comes this guy named Moses who's like, hey, let my people, not persons, let my people go so that they can be free. Not liberated, but free. So now, but before we get into the journey through the desert, let's just talk a little bit about the language. In the story, the language is very specific. It's talking about people because people are living, breathing men and women and not persons, which are entities, dead entities. And only living, breathing men and women can be free. The other word that we have to focus on is let my people go. In other words, let them be free. We don't use the word liberated, we use the word freedom so that they can be free to be what? To be with their one true creator. So now let's do the fast forward of the story. So Moses takes a bunch of the Hebrews out. Now here's an interesting fact. Many people may not know this, but not all of the Hebrews followed Moses. In other words, some of them chose to stay back in captivity. This is important because it's called a Stockholm Syndrome. The Stockholm Syndrome is that one falls in love with their captor, or they become very comfortable with their construct in which they're living, even if it's in involuntary servitude. Why is that significant for this story? Because God created everybody with their own free choice. We can argue not free will. Free will is something that God has implanted with us, and we have the will to follow through with whatever it is that we're choosing. However, the choice is free. You can choose whatever path you so want to choose. So having said all that, there are 80% of the Hebrews chose upon their own accord to stay back. Why? Because it's a lot easier to stay within the captivity of what we would call Egyptian slavery, or also aka Babylon today. To be a voluntary servitude rather than having to meet the outskirts of the unknown, aka the desert, where there's no food, no shelter, nothing but this guy named Moses, and perhaps blind faith that this thing called the Creator is going to provide for you. So why would somebody choose to stay back? Well, as we said, it's more comfortable to stay in a construct that you're familiar with. With voluntary servitude, meaning choosing upon your own fruition to be a slave, stay in captivity, there comes some privileges. You got food, you got shelter, you got a steady paycheck, you've got a security, and it's through your own consent. This is the operative word, consent. Remember, involuntary servitude is not only illegal, but it would be anti-God, because God wants you to have your free will. So if he gave you a demand to be a slave, or do whatever his will is without your free choice, then you would, by definition, be giving up an unalienable right, meaning a right that cannot be taken away from you, which was granted by your Creator, to have your freedom of choice. Involuntary servitude, just like here in the modern day construct, is illegal. It's based off of biblical principles. Voluntary servitude is definitely legal, even if it's through coercion or manipulation. One always chooses on their own free will to consent. Here in modern day, the government cannot act without the consent, the voluntary consent or servitude of the governed. So now back to Exodus. So those chose to go with Moses were choosing to exit the Babylonian Empire at the time. on their own fruition. Those who chose to stay back chose to live in servitude because of all the benefits or the privileges. Just like today, the government gives you benefits and privileges in exchange for your servitude. So now they're walking through the desert. Now we know here that the law is actually the land, the air, and the water jurisdiction. The law is the land, the air, the water jurisdiction. So what exactly is the Exodus? So here we have a bunch of Hebrews following Moses, trying to be one with their Creator, trusting that they'll be provided for. And here come the Babylonian Empire, the government at that time, with their soldiers, or in modern time, their enforcing agents, to bring them back into servitude. Because those who chose to exit out of her, meaning Exodus, were in direct defiance of the construct called the Pharisees, the Egyptian Empire. And so now their back is against the wall, literally. Here come all the soldiers, and here's the Red Sea. Red Sea is water, a water jurisdiction. Moses saying, hey, trust the Creator, which is the highest jurisdiction, and we will be able to walk through the Babylonian water jurisdiction. And what happens? Well, we know. The Red Sea, the water jurisdiction, splits, and Moses walks on the land jurisdiction, guided by the highest jurisdiction, which is the Creator, which is trust law. What is trust law? Well, simply it is the only law that exists, which is God's law. Another way of saying trust law is to say trust the law, which is trust the Creator, who allows you to walk through the construct of the water jurisdiction back onto the natural law, which is the land jurisdiction, to enter into, through your own choice, the kingdom of heaven, which is the air jurisdiction, or the promised land. So let's talk about Jesus real quick. Jesus was one with his Creator. He was in the air jurisdiction, right? Which is the highest jurisdiction. And he walked on land. And he also was able to walk above the water jurisdiction, meaning he walked on water. He knew their laws better than they did, in addition to knowing God's law. And he was able to make it his own because he trusts the Creator. So what is the Exodus? The Exodus is you, through your own conscious choice that was granted to you by your Creator, because you're made in the image of your Creator, to use your choice, to have the courage to trust law and exit out of her the servitude of the Babylonian Empire, where you convert your rights into privileges for the benefit to be secure, as opposed to, with your own innate courage and will granted to you by your Creator, to choose to walk into the unknown and enter into the promised land. That's why very few will choose the promised land. We are on a time on our planet where now people have to make a choice. You can choose to stay in servitude, the Babylonian Empire, or you can exodus out of her and enter to the promised land. We here at Americans in Action are here to help you and guide you along your path, spiritually, emotionally, and everything else we can with the law, so that you can be free. Check us out at americansinaction.info, spiritawarenessfoundation.com, and our upcoming Q&A workshop on the 17th. Much love to you. I'm Jason Ian. Stand strong and stay free.